Today is the second episode of our four-part series of our virtual Festival of Music, Poetry, Art and Word set in Glengarra, Mountain Lodge and hosted by Burncourt Community Council. This virtual festival is a project that has been devised in lieu of performances originally programmed for a weekend-long festival at the lodge. As you no doubt are aware that this is not possible, so we are joining the online arts community in bringing these to you at home. Each episode is programmed with one art form in mind and filmed to highlight the beauty of the settings of the Mountain Lodge and Glengarra and how this environment inspires those artists who encounter it. This will include another aspect of the history of Mountain Lodge. The 4 episodes have been filmed and recorded at the Mountain Lodge in Glengarra Wood under the public health guidelines, and all measures have been taken to ensure that the safety of our artists, poets and writers. Once again, none of this would have been possible without the funding support of the Arts Office, the Tipperary Festival and Event Office, both administered by Tipperary County Council, and to whom we are extremely grateful.
Mountain Lodge is a protected structure and included in the National Inventory of Architectural Heritage, where it is given architectural, artistic and social categories of special interest. Throughout these 4 episodes, we take a virtual tour of Mountain Lodge with our artists. You will see in drone footage of the exterior that the roof has been replaced, and performances from each room highlight how the architectural and internal features are retained. As you walk through the original front door, you can observe the south-facing round bay, the wrought iron of the valance to the overhanging eaves and the historic lime render. We see the neo-Gothic small-pane timber sash windows, the fine glazing bars with the beautiful trefoil tracery feature to the top sashes. Entering the lodge, one is astounded that so much of the original building has survived. The panelled doors, fireplaces, the decorative cornices, and the plasterwork and ceilings, the window shutters and the timber floors. The wall-mounted gas fittings, which for a long time was the only source of lighting, remain to this day. But the piece de resistance, the most remarkable feature, is of the architecturally proportioned round drawing room. Later, when you see footage of this, or when in time you can encounter this again in person, think of the workmanship and the time involved in the crafting of the curved doors in perfect operation to this day. This is really the jewel in the crown of Mountain Lodge. And now, I would like to introduce you to Mitchelstown Writers Group and some of its members who have come to visit Mountain Lodge today. Mitchelstown Writers Group meet on a fortnightly basis in Mitchelstown Library. It's like an alternative book club, in that all read their own work, and this is critiqued and the author encouraged by other members. These writers will take you on a journey down memory lane, through wartime escapades, personal memories, often tinged with sadness and often with hilarity. Through the medium of story, memoir and poetry, they will evoke people, places and times, both local and foreign. Sad, funny, macabre, fantastical, factual, whimsical, serious, quirky, but never ever boring.
This is a story I wrote, or a piece of memoir, for the last book that Mitchelstown Writers Group produced called Memories. It's called A Ghost Itches. Nana was the youngest of 13 children. In her 80s, she was also the only surviving member of her family, so she liked to pray for them all each night. It took a long time. Nana, once widowed, refused to sleep in a room alone, in fear of being haunted during the night. So it fell to me, an only child in the household, to be her roommate. I thus became privy to and part of all her nightly rituals. Over the old fireplace in our bedroom was a huge oil painting of the Virgin and Child. The holy water font was hanging right beside it. Long before Jesus had his feet washed by Mary Magdalene, his baby toes were drenched each night by my grandmother as she shook a drop for each of her departed siblings, her parents and all her extended family. The living got a showering too. On down went the list, Nana's murmurings lulling me into sleep, only to be rudely reawakened by the cold blessing landing on my forehead when she processed around the room, bathing everything in sight in order to keep us safe during the night. Once the spiritual side was dealt with, the practicalities began. Unwinding her long plait from around her head and brushing out her swathe of waist-length hair, applying Vaseline to her forehead to keep it smooth, and pouring liquid paraffin into her ears to prevent a build-up of wax. She also drank some of that to keep her bowels in good working order. The white enamel chamber pot was placed strategically under the bed, but within easy reach in case she got short-taken during the night. Then the undressing began, layer after layer, culminating in the removal of her long-legged pink or blue knickers, which in winter months she then placed on her head in order not to waste the heat. A recycler before the term ever became part of our vocabulary. Rosary beads in hand, her sibilant whisperings finally allowed me to fall into an undisturbed sleep until morning. When she broke her hip and could no longer climb the stairs, we moved into one of the large front rooms downstairs, which became our bedsit. It also became the social hub of the house when friends and relatives came to visit. The holy water ritual was abandoned in favour of reading novenas, provided by a zealous niece who always brought a new one when she visited from Cork, so they rapidly grew in number. To many it may seem strange, this close relationship between a teenager and a grandmother who was 72 years her elder. But in many ways, I found Nana was younger in spirit than my parents. As she prayed, I played, on the record player in the room, the hits of the day, and when I acquired a tape recorder and she was in good form, I amassed a wealth of songs and stories from her memory, which I still have today. Fond of Powers, whiskey and snuff, without them, life to her was dull and dreary. When I started dating, her advice was, remember, any fella who doesn't drink or smoke is no good, only a dry-out pot. You need a fella with a bit of life in him. She despised any man who wore a pioneer pin, claiming he was only a wimp. To this day, I have difficulty forming a fairer opinion of such men myself. Throughout those years, which were many, as Nana died just 3 months before her 100th birthday, I can recall just one event which caused rancour and many a row between us. Nana developed the itch. This itch, she claimed, started in bed at night and kept her awake for hours. I looked at the spot and saw no sign of rash or redness on her blemish-free skin. Highly indignant at my dismissive manner, we had our first blazing row. Always obsessed by her health, she liked to have the doctor call quite often, and he, who held her in very high esteem, obliged willingly. I felt confident that he would verify my own diagnosis, so imagine my disgust when, after examination of the leg in question, he pulled out his prescription pad. "This is very expensive cream, so use it sparingly," he told me. Where exactly was I to apply it? Where was this phantom itch? Nana's complaints outweighed my reasoning, and she looked on smugly as he explained to me that since her sleep was disturbed by this discomfort, he felt he should try to alleviate the situation. I ended up resentfully performing my own nightly ritual, and I lavished on the prescribed cream all over her leg to cover all possibilities and to stop any future rogue itches from invading that territory. At 18, I had lots of exciting prospects on my mind, and rubbing cream onto a 90-year-old's leg was not one of them. The cream ran out, and the itch was eventually forgotten amongst other more real issues. And now, as I lay in bed at night, sleep disturbed, my right heel scratching my left instep, in a spot where there is no rash or blemish of any kind to be seen, Nana's voice echoes down the 40 years since she passed away. "If you don't pray for me when I'm gone, I'll come back and haunt you."
The knock on the door, an unusual time, the familiar rat-tat, an old school friend has come to visit, household chores are immediately postponed, the kettle is switched on and numerous couples, and much chit-chat follows. Unexpected visitors, yes, I've had them. A crash of glass breaking one Sunday morning revealed a sheep in the dining room. Not to talk of a cow who strolled into the shop on one of the pre-March fair days. However, I was not at all ready or welcoming to Queen Ant and her invading family when they came to visit me. It was midsummer 2005. I entered my bathroom anticipating the comfort of the water to soothe the aching muscles after a day's work in the garden. Bifocal spectacles sometimes create a distorted view. I thought I saw a black mass. To my horror, I realised that the black mass was not my imagination, and to make it worse, it was moving. Before I could draw my breath, the ants were everywhere. In the bath, the sink, on towels, on walls and floor, and veering towards the hot clothes press. "What do ye want, ye horrible creatures?" I asked frantically. What did I do? What could I do? Close the door. Keep them in one room. Oh no, not me and the ants. I remember reading somewhere that ants have 6 legs, and each leg has 3 joints, and the legs are strong, so they can run fast. I ran to the garden shed and grabbed anything that in despair I thought would kill insects. My pacifist theories vanished as I sprayed and sprayed, creating corpses, but unable to keep up with the faster moving insects. My bathroom was now like a battlefield, dead black bodies everywhere, masses of insecticide and no order to anything. Still more young ones appearing from under the skirting board. I lifted the carpet, still more. I couldn't decide whether I was more threatened by the moving mass or the dead bodies. I decided then to trace the entry. No, they didn't knock at the door or come crawling through a window. They seemed to have squeezed through a tiny crack in the wall. On looking outside, I found another battalion, legging it up the drain pipe, then vanishing into an obvious crack in the wall and into an outlet pipe. I sprayed my insecticide again. I tried to block entries by putting loads of filler over or at the tiny cracks. My unqualified plasterer's hands left a further horrific mess. I didn't have a bath. I didn't have a night's restful sleep either, except to have a horror film-like dream. Small numbers trickled in for the following 2 days. I was brutal and gory with the ant-killer powders. By now, what had been a civilised bathroom was a mess of dead bodies, filler and powder. could one be organic and a pacifist in these circumstances, I asked. The sympathy I got from my friends wasn't funny. They laughed at my descriptions and made comments like, "Sure, ants are clean and tidy insects. Ants have 250,000 brain cells, are nomadic, and are constantly moving. They only live one night. But I learnt on the internet that they can live 45 to 60 days. I heard also that putting sugar outside near their point of entry keeps them fed and outside the house. However, the ants were not deterred or discouraged. Each year they visit me faithfully, despite any ant deterrents I use or hear about. On holiday in Cuba in 2008, one of my fellow holiday mates told me she had to have her room changed because the shower was full of ants. I cringed as I carefully examined my shower. To my relief, I found just one ant. And now I know that ants are not even afraid of Fidel Castro. To end on an antsy note, the flying ants came again to me last month.
A poem to a body part. My eyes astigmatized. One sees too much, the other not enough. Don't worry, together you give me my view of the world, my view and mine alone. Loving kindness, that's what you deserve. I tire you out, force you to view. How much is left unseen? What force compels you, pushing forward for my burning brain? No matter, let us rest, let us sleep a little longer. Loving kindness.
I call this a view from my kitchen window. I am a creature of habit. Aren't we all, I hear you say. Most mornings I wake up early. I like to start the day with the 7 o'clock news. Then I slip out of bed and put the kettle on. With a mug of tea in my hand, I observe from my seat at the kitchen table the new day beginning. The year 2020, as we all remember, was like no other. In an effort to halt the pandemic, the country, like many parts of the world, ground almost to a halt. Apart from essential services, people where possible were advised to work from home. Schools and colleges were closed, and Shanoris like me were advised to cocoon for our own safety. Cocoon to me suggested comfort and security. I didn't mind being asked to stay inside. I wasn't living alone. I had no childcare problems. I wasn't worried about my home or my job. My shopping was delivered. I didn't have to go anywhere I didn't want to go or do anything I didn't want to do. I realised I was very lucky. Besides, it would be a new experience, I decided. So I went to the local library and stocked up on reading material. I reckoned it would be a few weeks at most before everything returned to normal. How wrong I was. That was almost 6 months ago, and in the last 2 weeks, our government rolled out a roadmap for living with the virus for the next 6 months. During that time, from my seat at the kitchen table, I witnessed the life as I knew it gradually slowing down. The aviation vapour that was a feature of our aerial landscape gradually disappeared from the lovely clear skies we enjoyed last spring. Similarly, our once busy road became almost silent. Perhaps it was the absence of all this noise and busyness, but it seemed to me that nature stepped in to fill the vacuum. As I watched the various birds flitting about the garden, busy getting on with life, the activity of a pair of robins aroused my interest. I had been watching them for a few days. They seemed to be very visible in the morning, breakfast time, I guessed. With his beak laden with worms and insects, one would perch on the clothesline, sit for a second, change position, land on the nearby rosebush, back to the clothesline, and wait. This, I decided, was the male bringing food to a nesting female. She, taking her time, emerged from the ivy on the boiler house, flew past, ignored the food-laden partner, and disappeared into a nearby shrub. He, like the dutiful spouse, followed and emerged shortly after and headed off in search of more sustenance. She, after a short interval, returned to the ivy-clad wall. I couldn't understand why the food wasn't exchanged on the clothesline, why the flying into the shrub, and why the slight delay in returning to the nest. Maybe she was afraid there was something more dangerous than me watching this performance. This procedure would be repeated several more times. I noticed that the one I called the male was never allowed to enter the nest. Although I watched every morning, my two little friends disappeared without my noticing. I hope wherever they are that they are safe and happy. Of all our garden birds, the robin must be the most easily recognisable. With his brightly coloured red breast and cheeky manner, he brightens up our lives during the long days of winter. We can be sure our Christmas post will include several cards depicting this little bird. The robin is one of the few birds that sing all the year round. I'm always amazed at the sound this little fellow can make when he sticks out his chest and lets the melody flow. He is fiercely territorial and will defend his patch with great ferocity. I discovered that the robin starts to look for a mate around the shortest day of the year. The female takes the lead, is often rebuffed, but is not deterred. Eventually, she wears him down and she gets her man. The male starts the female almost immediately, even though food for both may be readily available. This strengthens the bond between them and ensures during nesting season the female is free to remain on the nest for longer. The pair stay together for the duration and can rear more than one brood. I often wonder where the little fledglings from last spring went to. Are they in some other garden, putting fear into any bird that dares enter their territory? Hopefully, the next nesting season will see us return to more normal times. By the way, I have completely gone off the word cocoon. It will forever remind me of very frightening times.
The Tea Party by Esther Langley. I looked across the room filled with old people arranged carefully on chairs. There was a pale lady in the distance. She was my mother, and I moved quickly across the room to join her. When she recognized me, her face began to crumple like a child's, and tears of gratitude welled into her eyes. I was very glad that I had come. Our roles were reversed. A tall woman addressed us all. She was going to entertain us with songs, she told us, songs that we would all love. She would sing the first one, and then we would all be very welcome to join in, and she did hope we would. The accompanist began to play the air of When Irish Eyes Are Smiling, and the strong sound of the contralto voice resounded. I listened to the words for the first time and visualized the soft, kind eyes of a young Irish girl welcoming me. Later I found myself singing along with everyone as the melody changed into My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean. I remembered climbing up the stairs to the music master's small room at Newtown School 35 years earlier. We all crowded in. Some of the boys were boisterous, and there was a heady excitement as we began singing that same song, thinking of a secret lover of our own waiting for us across the sea. Tears began to spring to my eyes too, as my mother was touched as I reached for her hand. I was glad I had joined the church choir in our local country town, I thought, as my melodious voice rang out in tune with the other mingled voices, some old and slightly crackling, and others gentle and out of tune. Memories flooded back to me, and I found it hard to hold back my tears. I surreptitiously stroked my upper cheek as a tear occasionally rolled onto it. I remembered the little religious glass-framed picture that my mother had posted to me when I was aged 8 at a boarding school. I had to pull out a cardboard flap at the back to make a stand for the picture, and I was so excited to see my mother's familiar writing appear when I pulled open the flap. She had written in the small space, "Hello, I hope you are happy and well." I glanced at the groupings of very old women interspersed with proud nurses and even prouder relatives. Each had come to bond with their own. One sweet old lady had a carefully made top knot on her head. Another had an unusual little ponytail. The atmosphere was warm and convivial, and love radiated throughout the room. The ladies' committee had spent some weeks planning for this occasion, and everything was falling into place. There were carefully arranged trolleys near the wall. Each had a pretty flower arrangement on them, and the cups and saucers gleamed in the sunlight that shone through the window. When the clapping ceased and the thank you speech was made, there was a sudden bustle of activity. Nurses and kind lady committee members were coming over with cups of tea and a choice of scones or sandwiches. I turned to my mother and asked if she'd enjoyed the concert. Yes, she replied in a squeaky monosyllable voice that she had developed in recent months. I recalled the occasions when she had encouraged me to play the piano and accompany myself singing English folk songs. She always made me feel I was as entitled to sing and play music as well as the next person, and of course she was quite right. I reminisced with her about her childhood that she often told me about, and how she used to go down to the Bunlucky shore in Donegal and scrub the rocks there and pretend they were the floor of her house. She had later fallen in love with a much older man who had jokingly told her that when she grew up he would be the King of Ireland and she would be his queen. He'd only been joking, but she believed him and had nurtured this exciting idea in her heart during her adolescent years. She was shattered when she heard that he was to marry another person, and felt so disillusioned and let down, and painfully hurt to think she would not be the Queen of Ireland after all. However, she got over that and set her thoughts towards young men of her own age. When she was learning weaving in Oxford, she made friends with a group who did country dancing, and she especially liked a man called Arthur, perhaps because his home life was so different to hers. He came from a fairly bohemian background, and his family was working-class English people, where she was brought up in an aristocratic family and lived in the manor house of Duncanooly village in Donegal. They walked hand in hand into the drawing room of her family home and announced to her parents that they were engaged to be married. This wasn't the convention at the time, apparently, and her parents were rather taken aback. However, a month or two later, she herself was heartbroken when her beloved Arthur told her that he'd been offered a job, but that this job did not fit in with his idea of her. As he intimated that he would like to accept this job, she took it as a rejection of her and realized she would have to try to forget him. She later married my father Gerald, who had been more like a brother to her. She hadn't considered him as a prospective suitor, as he was a few years younger, and was associated more with giving her young brother grinds in Latin. However, they were very fond of each other and were very good friends, so it was an ideal match. He'd been offered a good job in the Indian Civil Service, having got a first-class honours degree in classics from Oxford University. She felt apprehensive setting off in the boat to India, leaving her parents and her younger sister and 3 brothers behind. But she was also filled with excitement at the prospect of this new and interesting life far away. They were married the next day in Delhi with only the church cleaner as a witness, and seemingly no photos of the occasion. Life with a large house and lots of Indian servants, and later an ayah for each of her 4 children born there, must have been very far removed from her earlier days in a small Donegal village. She had simple tastes and would have preferred to bake her own bread, but she adapted as well as she could and went to the bridge club and the various social functions, even painting her face one evening when she went to a grand dance. The Second World War changed everything. There was a threat of a Japanese invasion of India, and she and Gerard made the difficult decision that she should go to England with their 4 children until the war was over. She also was anxious to see her dying mother in England. Fate was to take a strange turn, and shortly after she had begun this journey, the ship was torpedoed by the Germans. She found herself huddled into a lifeboat with her children, 3 girls aged 12, 7 and 3, and a boy of 10. After 2 grueling weeks, when it was unbearably hot by day and cold at night, she was exhausted and just wanted to float to the bottom of the sea. She had mixed feelings of happiness and utter weakness when someone shouted out, "A ship, a ship!" And the realization came that we were actually being rescued after all the despair. We were carried up rope ladders to this clean, newly painted cargo ship, and gradually acclimatized ourselves to taking part in life again. We were brought to South Africa, where we lived for 5 years, my mother never seeing her poor mother, who died in England shortly after our arrival in South Africa. We later joined as a family in England and finally came to Ireland, where my father retired and took to doing history research and got a job as a lecturer in Trinity College. I remembered all these things, but I was now back in time to the tea party at the Molyneux home for the elderly, and I looked at my sweet, soft-skinned mother and felt a rush of affection for her.
This is a poem I wrote about rural electrification in Ireland. Each rural area, each village and townland would have meetings. I think it was organised by Mountail, where all the neighbouring farmers would have to agree that the poles could go through their land. So this is it anyway. It's called A Nod from the Boss. The meeting was held, the hall was full up. Such a difference, all the wise men said. But it's not natural, my grandmother said. She was the boss, and what she said went. It could burn the house down and kill us in our beds. I won't let it inside the door. Too dangerous, she said. But missus, at the flick of a switch, you will have light all around. It's clean and it's safe, it's the modern thing. It's fast and it's cheap, my father said. It could set fire to the thatch, then what would we do? On the side of the road we'd be, because of you. But the wires are insulated, it's perfectly safe, and you can boil a kettle by plugging it in. You'd have tea in your hand in 5 minutes flat. My grandmother said, I'd doubt that. And a gleaming white cooker with no turf or smoke would boil the spuds and make the bacon sing. And all this at the same time, so fast and so clean, an electric cooker would be a wonderful thing. And what would I do with all that time saved? Sure, I'm sitting here with one leg in the grave. In the event of a wake, my aunt put up, the house would be neat as a pin, because you could plug in a machine that would suck up the dirt, and the old goose wing would be left in the lurch. And the sheets and the blankets, no need to scrub. A machine would do it, it's called a twin tub. You could sew on your machine till well into the night. No need for lamps and paraffin oil. Tea lamps and candle grease would be a thing of the past. Go on out of that, sure 'tis too good to be true. You'll be telling me next it could milk a cow. Oh yes indeed, that's an amazing fact. It can do just that and milk a few at the time, was my uncle's retort. Holding up her hand, my grandmother said, stop! And what about God? It was he who said, let there be light. He's the man in charge of us all, don't forget. But you say it comes in a wire. How's that? Yes, on poles brought in from abroad, each house will be wired from here to the coast. A rosary of poles to bring us the light, but only to us if we sign up Monday night. You're talking me into it, I know what you're at, she said, cocking her head sideways and tugging her hat.
Gosh, my mother said. Sure, I almost forgot. There would be no need for a candle or a paraffin lamp. All day and all night a little red bulb would glow in front of the Sacred Heart. And so she said yes, my grandmother Boss, and signed her name with a shake of her head. But till the day she died, she wore her kid gloves when plugging in the kettle for her morning cup. One can't be too careful, my grandmother said. This is called Stargazing. I was first exposed to film when I was about 8 years old. It was in the old hall in Ballindangan. Earlier in the day, a couple arrived in a small van and unpacked a projector and large circular tins containing reels of film. In the movie business, these cans led to the expression, in the can. The hall had been swept and chairs and wooden seats were arranged in rows for the big event. There was a faint smell of paraffin as the hall was sometimes used for dances. A stiff white sheet now hung in front of a large stage curtain. This stage curtain had a picture of a round tower in the background and a wistful lady in a long dress holding an Irish wolfhound. Later, the visiting woman sat at the door in front of a small table, her long red fingernails like claws, taking each sixpence as it was eagerly handed over by excited customers. We had never seen the like before, and some of the smarter boys could be heard saying, "Cripes, would you imagine her milking a cow?" Finally the film began. First there was a short film of Laurel and Hardy, next Charlie Chaplin dashing after damsels in distress who were tied to a railway track with cars and trains hurtling towards them and who were just rescued in the nick of time. Then came the main film. It was a western that broke down a few times. The screen shone shapes like a game of noughts and crosses, but we didn't care. This was Hollywood brought straight to the centre of Ballindangan. When we moved in 1950 to Mitchelstown, I got my first introduction to a real cinema. I was taken to the Star Cinema in Church Street by a visiting aunt. I was not aware that the red velvet seats folded up against the back, and I tried to perch on top of the seat like a chicken on a roost until my aunt firmly pulled the seat and me down amidst the laughter of the girls in the row behind. Then the lights went out and a beam of light travelled from a small square box on the back wall like rays from the sun, and dust particles sparkled and danced on each beam. Petty news told us of events across the sea. The commentary given in a plummy, posh English accent. Then came the shorts, again Laurel and Hardy and the Three Stooges. A trailer or a taster of a film yet to come was shown before the main film. This main film was The Beast with Five Fingers. What an introduction to the world of the real cinema. To this day, when I hear the first chords on a few chords on the piano, I am transported back to that creepy movie. My parents could not understand why I had to have my bedroom door open all night. I could vividly imagine a hand, just a hand, making its way down the stairs and playing the piano or turning the key in the door and palming its way across the floor or pushing its way up through the rose bed. I could not say I was scared because of that film, otherwise I'd never be left to go to the cinema again. I was allowed to go on special occasions after that. Sometimes if the film broke down, shouts of "Bobby, Bobby" would come from the gods, as the front rows of seats were called, and suddenly Mrs. Sharp, and she was aptly named, would appear. It seemed out of nowhere, and shine her large torch in the boys' faces, her stern demeanour showing she would not tolerate any misbehaviour. If a western was particularly exciting, one boy would take out a cap gun from his pocket, crouch down behind the seat in front of him and aim at the enemy on the screen, leaving a smell of sulphur in the air. The Lone Ranger with the ever-faithful Tonto by his side, or the Cisco Kid were great favourites, and nobody ever seemed to question the fact that the Indians were always defeated and were portrayed as a bunch of savages, while the white cowboys were always perfect, with the odd bad boy exception who always met his doom. In the Presentation Convent School, going to the cinema was frowned upon, and some nuns would ask on a Monday morning, "Hands up who went to the cinema yesterday?" Those who were brave enough to put a hand up were given a lecture on the evils of film and the downfall of all who viewed them. If nobody put a hand up, there was always somebody who would name names. There was a trend then for collecting and swapping photographs of stars, and most of us kept scrapbooks, and we carefully pasted in pictures of our favourite stars. The more adventurous girls became members of a Film Stars fan club and held the whip hand when it came to owning or swapping pictures. The film magazines Modern Screen and Movieland were purchased from Broadway and then smuggled in home under my coat to under my mattress. Broadway was the perfect name for a shop that sold such glamour and was situated so adjacent to the Star Cinema. A visit to Nellie and Jerry's for bullseyes or slab toffee from Broadway was a must. We would bang the large slab on the wall, breaking it into bite-sized pieces of gum, clinging sweetness to make it last for most of the film. It was a sunny afternoon and ice cream cone from Mrs. O'Casey's was bought before going to the pictures. We would watch with eager anticipation as she twirled the cone around in her elegant fingers until it reached the peak of creamy perfection. There were many great films shown in the Star Cinema, or Sharps as some people called it, including the musicals Annie Get Your Gun, Oklahoma, Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, and South Pacific. Alfred Hitchcock's Rear Window and Marlon Brando's smouldering performance in On the Waterfront meant a new star had arrived on the scene to be hero worshipped. Rock Around the Clock broke all records and was shown for several nights, and extra chairs had to be brought in to seat the crowds. Now Bill Haley and the Comets and the Platters were new names in our teenage vocabulary. See you later, alligator became a slang leave-taking amongst some of the more cool boys. Then in the mid-1950s, we now had a choice in Mitchelstown with the opening of the O'Sheen Cinema. The first film shown, as I recollect, was Quo Vadis in glorious Technicolor. The screen was enormous and the sound bounced from the walls as chariots and horses trundled over huge Roman cobbles and almost jumped onto us with every Roman soldier or gladiator slain. There were gasps from the audience. Robert Taylor and Deborah Kerr were the stars, together with the great Peter Ustinov. It is said that Elizabeth Taylor lost out to Deborah Kerr for the lead in Quo Vadis, but of course she went on to greater things with her portrayal of Cleopatra. Then in the 1960s came television, and for a number of years the attendance at the cinema dwindled until finally television won the battle without any of the bloodshed or gory details that had been shown so often on the silver screen. And the O'Sheen and the Star were no longer with us. The O'Sheen is now called O'Sheen House and houses a very successful computer business, and townhouses are situated where the Star once stood.
I see you. I see you there beside the window, hands on the arm of the chair. Dishes collected, breakfast is over. Mid-morning you are sitting near the light, staring at the bright blue sky. I see you noticing the flowers, raising themselves up from the earth, eager to greet the March air, their colours bright like the sun, giving hope to those that see them. Snowdrops and daffodils, a crocus or two, lifting our spirits. We remember that nature springs hope eternal. Then, in your own private room, I see you clasping tightly to a photograph, the one of your loved ones. I see you remembering in the autumn of your days. I see you tenderly caress the frame in which they stand. You sit there, no words uttered, but loud as the sound of your heart, beating at the sound of another fresh day. Your memories always your own. I will always think of them as we think of you. I see you, you are not alone.
Yes, so this is a little introduction to a poem I wrote, Stargazing, Glengarra. Glengarra Wood is situated a few miles from Mitchelstown on the road to Cahir. It is a very historic place on the foothills of the Galtee Mountains. Apparently, it gets its name from Garra, who ruled the district in the 2nd century AD. He is reputed to have been a chieftain of the Morna tribe who inhabited the ancient territory of the Dacians. The first record we have an actual wood in Glengarra is in connection with the building of the mountain lodge. It is recorded in Lewis's topographical dictionary, which was published in the 1830s, that Lord Lismore of Shanbally Castle had recently built a hunting lodge in a glen in the Galties and surrounded it with 70 acres of woodland. This Georgian hunting lodge was designed by the famous architect John Nash of London. Many of the original tree species that were planted at that time have been preserved, and many beautiful old specimens still survive. The mountain lodge, together with the strip of old woodland along the Burncourt River, was donated to the Irish nation by the last owners of Shanvalley Castle, the ladies Constance Butler and Beatrice Pole Carew. Subsequently, the lodge served as a youth hostel for many years during the 20th century. However, quite recently, this beautiful building has been vandalized. It has now been taken over by the Burncourt Community Council, who have undertaken the task of renovating and refurbishing this historic building to bring it back to its original splendour. Glengarra Wood itself is the most popular amenity area with a car park and picnic area on the banks of the Burncourt River, and includes many woodland walks and nature trails radiating from it. The mountain lodge was built about 1827, and at that time the foothills of the Galties were densely populated. During that period prior to the famine, Irish was the spoken language of the area, and this rural population would have had a rich culture of poetry, song, music and dance. It has been my great privilege to have spent almost 50 years living in this beautiful place. So I thought it would be an appropriate gesture to write a few verses of Irish in memory of those times and in appreciation of the wonderful heritage that has still survived. The title of the poem is Glengarra, the green wood of Glengarra. Fe vunknik na gailte at haimse in Coney, Glengarra kosh aun an coot doite. Mar ásan ga crown agus bláhanna glégal, an giúis is an júl sa chuil knóva crevach. Bíon rodí le fescint le cloisint i gcónaí, is mise ag fara hícán cún pórdach. Im hí fé dar arsa se bímse im éanar, ag éisteach le ceolbín lín sin bog chuanach. Bíon daoine ag siúlthart páistíos seanóirí, gus súnach súáilceach bíon becha ag crónán. An ann bheog go mairach ag sníomhos na sléite. Sícán bheog a néte is cosán gach téibdi. Tá an dair is an fuinseog, an salis an arnóg. Tá teile agus trám, sceach gal agus laróg. Col agus cuilan, gan tráchtar chrín chairan, rhododendron is lauras feh láth gach téibdiam. Élíní cantan go bínas go ceolbar, bharan na grán go mairach go beobar. An drólín an spidóg an lunas an céirseach, le fáine an le bín an cuil seo go héireach. Húsin san bhréach bín an cuileach go glórach, an iseoga cantan sa spéir gach tránhóna. Fiach a dú a córá is a caint le na céile, cuirig ag cogant is úníní ag léineach. Tá seantig sa cuil seo ag fiacant go glóte. Cútóirí ag tacht is ag imachta igóní. Consus beag a glacha ó siúlóid na chléite. Bíon fáilte is fithe le fáilir gach éine. And then I wrote another few verses on the wood of Glengarra. In all of my journeying around this green isle, through mountain and valley or many a mile, I've never yet seen a woodland so green as the beautiful wood of Glengarra. From the slopes of the great Galtee mountains spring 100 sparkling fountains. From hillside and dell and famed Carroll's Well flow the streams that wind down through Glengarra. Beside the great highway from Dublin to Cork, in the county Tipperary, far away from New York, it's there you will find the peace of your mind in the green leafy shade of Glengarra. You may picnic beneath the redwood so high, you may see the fleet deer on the hillside nearby. Oh, it's ever so still beside the clear rill, where once slept the chieftain called Garra. It's there you will find a rest for the night, in a hostel so warm, so cosy and bright. Beneath the hillsides in the valley it hides, once built by the Prince of Glengarra. The spruce and the larch, the pine and the yew, the great monarch oak and the mountain ash too, and the lady birch adds a silver touch to the beautiful wood of Glengarra.
You know what?
Sinead.
Come on up. Very good. Okay. This is a poem I've written about the graveyard, the old graveyard in Brighown. Though I have been living in Tipperary now for 40 years, this is about the graveyard opposite my home place in Brighown in Mitchelstown. It was November. The cemetery in the morning mist might have been a painting by Monet. Monastic Brighown in the morning haze, the scorching sun, the inky nightfall, all was visible from the cottage side window. Ancient, never chilling, haphazard, never foreign, steadfast, never wavering, shadowy, never transparent, familiar, never formal, springboard of the warrior saint, tales of a washerwoman in a sacred well, tales of cripples walking in the blind scene, tales of the blanching whale, tales of shawl-clad keeners, picnics on a crypt, hide and seek among the monuments, tales of ice-cold babes buried under the mask of night, tales of troubled spirits forbidden rest within the walls, tales of long-tailed families and their grand memorials, tales from the mist of time, but not like Monet's delicate as a dream, hearts and flowers, angels and verses, doves and etchings, crosses and lanterns, knick-knacks, and much, much more. Memories of Sweeney's Field, our playground, of caddy houses, of one-act dramas to extract a penny from our friends, of digging our way to the ends of the earth, of going camping all the way across the road, of yearning the boiled sweets from the three kind sisters who lived at Journey's End, of chasing scurrying rabbits in the field at evening, memories of the efforts not to tell a potential boyfriend that you lived opposite the graveyard on the off chance that he might offer to walk you home. Memories of television silenced, of unending funeral bells, of secrets told as we strolled among the tombs. After all, the dead cannot tell. And then progress. Sprawled between the hill and the boreen, a checkered space of uniformity. Was death really the leveller? A place of brutal sorrow, of lives crushed, of broken dreams, of ritual and prayer, of tears and smiles, of gratitude. A hallowed place, where with Wordsworth we remember the best portion of a good man's life, his little nameless acts of kindness and of love. And for me, the memory of a grinning godfather, responding to the telling of my midnight petrified dash down Brighown Hill. Sure, Gillabone, don't you know there's a lot more to fear from the living than the dead? Anyway, this was just one written in the summer, when our lives are taking such a turn, and it was written with regard to the roses. Oh, gather we the rose, while yet in flower we find it, for summer smiles. Like the rose, we, though emerging from one species, have many dimensions. There are some who are the rarest and fairest, others like the rosebud, quite immodest. There are always those who are a little full-blown or overblown. Some individuals are like the harebrained rambling pink. Certain of us, like the rain-drenched rose, are beautiful but sorrowful. Some, like the budding climber, are sober and thoughtful. Like the fashion diva, we have the stylized pink, the single petal, the dainty miniature. Then the unlucky, who will wilt before they bloom, remaining the obscure. There will be contrasting, passionate, seductive, buxom, newest yellow versus the untrained, unrefined and grave green. Oozing perfection, we know the fresh, flawless white, always pure vintage. Others resemble the prettiest wild and seemingly hardy, who become a little squashed by life. Of course, there are the hothouse indoor, sad and fair, unwilling and unable to tolerate the summer sun, lest they become wan and withered. Some folks, like the cottage rose, will remain old-fashioned but fragrant. And unfortunately, there will always be the handful of people, the thorny, intractable, briar-like and vindictive. One species, many dimensions. Now is the time not just to accept difference, but to celebrate them. Do not watch the petals fall from the rose with sadness. Know that, like life, things sometimes must fade before they can bloom again.
Thank you to Mitchelstown Writers Group. Nach raibh na scéalta agus na dáanta go húntaach. Go raibh míle maithe guibh go léir as éisteacht. Slán go fóil. Stay tuned for the final 2 episodes of the series next weekend, 28th and 29th of November.